What does Daniel 11:37 teach? Does it teach that the Antichrist is a flaming homosexual? Or does it teach something else? If you'd like to get an in-depth understanding of this verse, stay tuned. Hi there, I'm Lee Brainerd. Welcome to Soothkeep and another edition of Prophecy in the Crucible. My mission is truth, truth at any cost, truth above every other consideration. Now this afternoon we are examining Daniel 11:37, and here in this verse we read, "He shall not regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all." Now, many take the line that he shall not regard the desire of women to mean that he is indeed a homosexual. But is this what the passage actually teaches? As is frequently the case in my videos, the point to which I'm addressing is relatively small, but the underlying concept or the underlying theme is actually huge. The underlying theme here, as in so many of my videos, is our approach to the interpretation of Scripture. Now, there are two main rules for literal interpretation, and those are context and grammar. If we take a line out of context, then we're going to undermine historical grammatical hermeneutic. If we take a line or a phrase contrary to the rules of grammar, then we're going to undermine the historical grammatical hermeneutic. And not infrequently, these two mistakes are made together. The fact is, every significant false doctrine and every significant twisting of a passage boils down to at least one of these mistakes, and frequently both of them. Now, so let's take the first point, which is context. Remember, we're in verse 37. So if we drop back a verse earlier, we're going to read in verse 36, "The king shall exalt himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods." And if we go to the following context, which is verses 38 and 39, we're going to read, "But in his place," that is, instead of him, "he shall honor the God of forces. This shall he do against the strongholds with a strange god." Verse 39. So notice, the preceding context concerns the gods that he rejects, and the following context addresses the God that he owns. Now, before we go on and develop this a little farther, I want to take up one of the phrases that we read about the God that he owns because it confuses a lot of people. So this is our little rabbit trail for the day. The God of fortresses, which we read about in verse 38, which in the King James Bible is the God of forces, is equivalent to the God of worldly power bases. He's the God of worldly power. He is the God who grants worldly power. And this fits the description of the devil to a T, and the being given this power fits the Antichrist to a T. Now, we notice in verse 39 where it says that the God of forces is going to give him victory over the strongest fortresses on the planet. This is the Antichrist conquering and dominating the whole world. We read a very similar thing in Matthew chapter 4, verses 8 and 9, where we read that the devil showed Christ all the kingdoms of the world and their glory, and he said to him, "All these things will I give to you if you will fall down and worship me." Well, we know that Christ refused to fall down and worship him. He was not going to take what was rightfully his on the terms of the devil or the terms of the world. But when we come to the end of this age, the Antichrist is going to submit to these terms. He's going to accept the kingdoms of the world and their glory from Satan himself. And Satan can give this because 2 Corinthians 4:4 tells us that he is the God of this world. And we read in John 14:30 that he is the prince or the ruler of this world. And the Antichrist is going to receive them because we read in Revelation 13 verse 2 that the dragon gave him his power, his throne and great authority. So everything as far as this world has to concern that belongs to Satan, Satan gives these things for all practical purposes to the Antichrist. The Antichrist is going to worship him, and the world is going to worship the Antichrist. So in developing this rabbit trail, then we understand that this God of fortresses is Satan himself. So now let's move on to the grammar. One of the most useful tools that we have for understanding the Bible is grammar, but it's also one of the tools that's most often missing from the Bible interpreter's toolbox. We need to understand the grammar of our own language, we need to understand grammar in general, and we need to understand the grammar of the biblical languages, Greek and Hebrew. If we don't, we're going to struggle a lot in our interpretation of passages. Now, a handy tool for understanding Old Testament passages is to have a grasp of the use of parallelism in Hebrew poetry and prose. And this really, if you understand it, is one of your very best friends for understanding Old Testament passages. Now, Hebrew poetry and prose regularly have pairs, sometimes triplets, of ideas, and they go together. They're all three the same, or both are the same. And these groups are things that are the same. If we understand this principle, it's going to throw a lot of light on difficult passages for us. Now, note the triplet that we see in verse 37. Here we read the God of his fathers, the desire of women, and any God. And now notice the contrary triplet in verses 38 and 39. We see in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses. We see a God which his fathers did not know, he shall honor with gold and silver. And we see he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign God. So we had a group of three before, two of which are obviously gods, and then we have a group of three after, which are portrayals of the God that he serves, which we know is Satan. So when we look at this parallel of 3 and 3 implies that the phrase the desire of women also refers to a God. When you look at the commentaries that actually go down this path and pick out this parallelism and point out that it has to be a god, they offer us two options. One, they offer us the Syrian deity Tammuz or Adonis, and you can look that up in Ezekiel 8:14. Or it could be Venus, which we see in Jeremiah 7:18 and Jeremiah 44:17. So we've got two potential gods here. One's a goddess and one is a male god. Now, this parallel construction is why the NIV translates this for the one desired by women, and why the ESV reads to the one beloved by women. And it is why the New Living Translation paraphrases the God loved by women. Now, just a little rabbit trail here. I use paraphrases at times because they help to illuminate a passage. You can use them like a commentary, but I don't encourage anyone to use a paraphrase for their basic Bible translation. Your basic Bible translation needs to be a literal translation. Now, there are two other understandings that take a slightly different tack than just one of the pagan gods for the understanding of this phrase, the desire of the women. The first theory is called the wives theory. And some suggest that the phrase, the desire of women, should be understood in the sense of the woman desired, or the God desired by your wife or by your woman. And so this theory says that the Antichrist is not going to be following his father's God, he's not going to be following his wife's God, and he's not going to be following his own God. He's not going to be following any God at all. And this theory has a ring of plausibility to it, and it does fit the Old Testament propensity for patterns like that. However, there doesn't seem to be any indication in the Bible that the Antichrist is going to have a wife, much less plurality of wives. Notice that this is in the plural, okay? The desire of women. So the translation and this understanding is theoretically possible, but it is just a theory. Now, the second theory is the Messiah theory. Some older commentators think that the desire of women is the desire to birth the Messiah. And this argument starts in Genesis 3:15, where we have the promise of the seed of the woman. And then they go to Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, where we read that Eve says, I have gotten a man from the Lord. And some versions paraphrase it a little bit and say, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And they claim that from the Lord and with the help of the Lord is a wrong translation, and that it should be translated, I have gotten a man, the Lord, i.e. the Messiah. So they are understanding this passage in this following way. They're saying the Antichrist is not going to have a desire for the God of his fathers, who's Jehovah or Yahweh, and he's not going to have a desire for the Messiah, Yeshua, who's desired by women, and he's not going to have a desire for any God whatsoever. He's going to exalt himself above all the gods. And this understanding is logical, it's harmonious, and it's definitely true. However, in fact, the translation is grammatically possible. But I suspect that the most likely translation by a long shot is in the direction that we see in all the major literal translations, where we read, I have gotten a man from the Lord, or I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Now, even though I've admitted that this is, a little bit of a long shot, but it's within the realm of possibility for being grammatically legitimate, I think we are so early in the unfolding of the message of redemption that I doubt that Adam and Eve really had a full understanding of the revelation of the Redeemer. I don't think that they foresaw that the Redeemer was going to be God manifest in the flesh. I think all they knew is somewhere down the line that some woman was going to bear a son who's going to be the Redeemer and redeem them from the problem that they were part of creating. And I wouldn't be surprised if Eve was herself hoping she could bear that Redeemer. And if many women down the line, and even outside of the line, were hoping that they could bear the Redeemer. But it's very unlikely that Adam and Eve had the understanding that the Messiah or the Redeemer was going to be God manifest in the flesh, and therefore I don't think she could possibly have said, I have gotten a man, Jehovah, or Yahweh, or the Lord. I don't think that's remotely possible. I think this is far beyond the realm of what was revealed to them, and far beyond the realm of what's possible to draw out of what was given to them. So I want to review 3 points here in conclusion. One, while it is very difficult to determine exactly which God is referred to by the phrase the desire of women, it is certain that it's to be understood in the sense of a third God that is rejected. And I think these 3 gods that are rejected probably are they probably represent all the possibilities from the true God and all the other gods that you could pick from. And while I do personally believe the first theory that I presented, which is this is just one of the pagan gods, and I don't believe it's the wives theory or the Messiah theory, yet if you think that one of those latter 2 theories is the right way to go, that's between you and the Lord. The main thing I want to point out here is that this is referring to gods. This whole passage is referring to gods that the Antichrist is going to reject and the God that he's going to embrace. And so it doesn't matter what God you're going to put in there you think he's rejecting, as long as you understand that he's definitely rejecting a God, whether it's a true God or a false God. The second thing I want to point out to, number 2 here, is that the phrase doesn't regard the desire of women was not intended to teach us that the Antichrist is a homosexual, much less exclusively homosexual. This seems to be cherry-picking a line out of the context and giving it an understanding that really is contrary to the context. And the third point I want to make is, while this passage doesn't ascribe homosexuality to the Antichrist, much less exclusive homosexuality, the odds are very high that he will indeed engage in a wide variety of sexual perversion himself. The fact is, folks, he is an in-the-flesh manifestation of Satan. He's, for all practical purposes, Satan manifest in flesh. And he's going to embrace and engage in a wide variety of iniquity and wickedness and perversion, basically every major kind of perversion that Satan has ever introduced. And so, yes, the Antichrist will very likely be bisexual or pansexual, and he will very likely engage in homosexual sexual activity. Well, I trust that this video has been a help to you, and I trust that it's going to help you with a better understanding of how to approach the interpretation of difficult passages in the Bible, particularly passages in the Hebrew Old Testament. And I pray that you will have a deeper appreciation of the Scriptures and a deeper appreciation of the Lord and a deeper appreciation of Bible prophecy, and that you will indeed be looking for and longing for the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. So may the Lord bless you as you seek to understand Him and His Bible and His prophetic teaching better. Eyes wide open, brain engaged, heart on fire. We'll see you next time.